Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to Her True Stories. I'm so grateful you're here with us today. If you're new to our channel, this is where we share raw, unfiltered stories of women who refuse to be silently taken advantage of. Today's story will absolutely shock you. It's about a grandmother's ultimate revenge that no one saw coming. This is going to be a long one, folks, so grab your coffee, get comfortable, and make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss a single moment of what happens when kindness is mistaken for weakness. Trust me, this story will take you on an emotional roller coaster that will leave you cheering by the end. My name is Marie Mason, and at 67 years old, I thought I understood what unconditional love meant. I thought I knew what it looked like to sacrifice for family, to put your children's needs before your own, to give until it hurt, and then give some more. For 5 long, exhausting years, I had been sending exactly $5,000 every single month to my daughter Jessica and her husband Brad, who lived in their expensive Boston suburb with my 7-year-old grandson Tommy. $5,000. Every month, without fail. Rain or shine, sick or healthy, whether I could afford it or not. That's $60,000 a year, folks. In 5 years, I had quietly, systematically transferred $300,000 of my modest retirement savings to help them maintain their comfortable lifestyle. And that doesn't even include the massive down payment I'd provided for their house. Another $80,000 that I had scraped together by selling my childhood home in Ohio, cashing in my late husband Robert's life insurance policy, and borrowing money from relatives I was too proud to ask for help. Let me paint you a picture of what my life looked like during those 5 years. I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Cleveland, furnished with hand-me-downs and thrift store finds. My monthly Social Security check was $1,847. My small pension from 30 years of working as a school secretary added another $623. That gave me a total monthly income of $2,470. After rent, $950 for my cramped apartment, utilities, $150 on a good month, groceries, I'd mastered the art of living on $200 a month, insurance and basic necessities, I had maybe $800 left over each month for everything else, medications, clothing, emergencies, and any small pleasures that might make life worth living. But instead of keeping that money for my own needs, instead of saving for my own uncertain future, I was sending $5,000 every month to Jessica and Brad. That meant I was actually living in deficit every month, slowly draining what little savings I had left to maintain their comfortable lifestyle. How did I manage it? I got creative with poverty in ways that would shock you. I bought expired meat marked down for quick sale and froze it immediately. I clipped coupons religiously, planned my grocery trips around sales, and learned to make one chicken last for 6 meals. I wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, buying new clothes only when the old ones literally fell apart. I kept my apartment so cold in winter that I could see my breath, wearing layers of sweaters instead of turning up the heat. When I got sick, I delayed doctor visits until I absolutely couldn't function anymore. When my glasses broke, I held them together with tape for 8 months before I could afford to replace them. When my car needed repairs, I learned to live without it for weeks at a time, taking 3 buses to get anywhere I needed to go. And through it all, every month without exception, I sent that $5,000 transfer to Jessica's account. "You're too generous, Marie," my neighbor Mrs. Patterson would say when she'd see me loading up on generic brand groceries and day-old bread. She was one of the few people who knew about my monthly transfers to Jessica. "Don't you worry they're getting too comfortable with your handouts? What happens when you can't keep this up anymore?" I'd always laugh it off, putting on a brave face even when her questions hit uncomfortably close to home. What's the point of keeping score? They're my family. As long as they're living well, I'm happy. Money's just money. You can't take it with you. But deep down, Mrs. Patterson's words echoed in my mind during those long, Cold nights when I'd lie awake calculating and recalculating my dwindling bank balance, wondering how many more months I could keep this up before I'd have nothing left. My friends at the senior center didn't know the full extent of what I was doing. They knew I helped Jessica out from time to time, but I was too embarrassed to admit the true scope of my financial sacrifice. When they'd suggest going out for lunch or taking a day trip somewhere, I'd make excuses about being tired or having other plans. The truth was, I couldn't afford a $12 lunch or a $25 bus tour. The isolation was almost as hard as the financial strain. While other women my age were enjoying their retirement, taking cruises, spoiling grandchildren, pursuing hobbies, I was living like a monk, denying myself every comfort and pleasure so that Jessica and Brad could maintain their middle-class lifestyle. But I told myself it was worth it. I told myself that their comfort was my purpose, that supporting my daughter's family was the most meaningful thing I could do with my remaining years. I told myself that the sacrifice gave my life meaning. Looking back now, maybe Mrs. Patterson was right all along. Maybe I had been reduced to nothing more than a walking ATM in my daughter's eyes. Maybe my kindness had been mistaken for foolishness, my generosity interpreted as weakness. The brutal realization would come crashing down just 3 days before Christmas, in a phone call that would shatter every illusion I'd built about my role in their lives and set in motion a chain of events that would change all of our futures forever. To understand the full scope of what happened next, you need to understand the history between Jessica, Brad, and me. You need to know about the house, that beautiful 3-bedroom colonial in Cambridge that had become the symbol of everything I'd given and everything I'd lost. Jessica met Brad when she was 26, working as a marketing coordinator for a small tech company in Boston. He was 28, charming, ambitious, with an MBA from a decent school and big dreams about climbing the corporate ladder. They dated for 2 years before he proposed with a ring that cost more than I made in 3 months. I liked Brad initially. He was polite to me, seemed to genuinely care about Jessica, and had that confident way of talking about the future that made you believe good things were coming. When they announced their engagement, I was thrilled that my daughter had found someone who appeared stable and committed. The wedding was modest, but beautiful. I contributed what I could. About $3,000 from my savings to help with the reception costs. It seemed like a good investment in their happiness, and I was proud to be able to help them start their marriage without debt hanging over their heads. For the first year of their marriage, they lived in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment in Somerville, splitting a $2,800 monthly rent that ate up nearly half their combined income. Jessica made about $48,000 at her marketing job, and Brad was earning $52,000 as a junior analyst at a financial services firm. They were getting by, but just barely. The apartment was in an old building with thin walls, no air conditioning, and a heating system that barely worked. I visited them a few times that first year, sleeping on their lumpy couch and trying not to notice the water stains on the ceiling or the way the floor creaked ominously in the kitchen. "We're saving for a house," Jessica would tell me enthusiastically during those visits. "We've got a plan. If we can just stick to our budget for 3 or 4 years, we'll have enough for a down payment on something nice." I could see how much the cramped apartment bothered them, especially Jessica. She'd grown up in a comfortable house with her own bedroom, a backyard, and space to breathe. The tiny apartment felt like a step backward to her, a sign that adult life was harder than she'd expected. Then came the pregnancy. Jessica called me on a Tuesday evening in March, her voice bubbling with excitement and terror.
"Mom, I'm pregnant."
"We're having a baby." I was overjoyed, of course. My first grandchild. But even as I congratulated them and started planning my first visit to help prepare, I could hear the underlying anxiety in both their voices when we talked about practical matters. The 1-bedroom apartment wouldn't work with a baby. They'd need more space, better neighborhood, access to good schools eventually. But housing prices in the Boston area were astronomical, and their savings for a down payment were still pathetically small. "We've been looking at places," Brad told me during one of our phone conversations. "But everything decent requires at least a $60,000 down payment, and we've only got about $8,000 saved up. We're thinking maybe we'll have to move further out, maybe to Worcester or somewhere cheaper." I could hear the disappointment in his voice. Worcester meant a brutal commute for both of them, lower quality schools eventually, and a step down in lifestyle that felt like failure. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. "How much would you need for a nice place closer to the city?" I asked. "Well, there's this house in Cambridge we've been looking at," Jessica said wistfully. "3 bedrooms, nice neighborhood, good schools. But it's $425,000, which means we'd need about $80,000 to $85,000 for the down payment and closing costs." It was almost everything I had in my retirement accounts, accumulated over 30 years of working and careful saving. It was money I'd planned to live on in my old age, my security blanket against an uncertain future. But I could hear the longing in Jessica's voice when she talked about that house, could picture my future grandchild growing up in a safe neighborhood with good schools and room to play. What was money compared to family? What was my own security compared to giving my daughter and her family the chance at the American dream? "Let me help you," I said. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. "Mom, we couldn't ask you to do that," Jessica finally said, but I could hear the hope creeping into her voice. "You're not asking. I'm offering. Family helps family." What followed were weeks of emotional conversations, with Jessica and Brad initially protesting that they couldn't accept such a large gift, then gradually warming to the idea as I convinced them it was what I wanted to do. "Are you sure about this?" Brad asked me during one of our heart-to-heart talks. "That's a lot of money, Marie. We don't want you to sacrifice your own security for us." "I'm 62 years old," I told him. "I've got Social Security and my pension coming. This money is just sitting in an account earning almost nothing. It makes me happier to see it help you and Jessica build a life together than it ever could just sitting in some bank." It wasn't entirely true. The money wasn't just sitting there. It was my safety net, my insurance against poverty in old age. But seeing their faces light up when they talked about the house, imagining holidays and family gatherings in a real home instead of that cramped apartment, felt worth more than financial security. The process of liquidating my retirement funds was more complicated and expensive than I'd anticipated. There were penalties for early withdrawal, taxes to pay, forms to fill out. By the time all was said and done, turning my retirement savings into cash for their down payment cost me an additional $12,000 in fees and penalties. I also had to sell my childhood home in Ohio, the house where I'd grown up, where Robert and I had lived for the first 5 years of our marriage, where I'd planned to retire someday. It was a modest 3-bedroom house with a big backyard and a front porch where I'd spent countless summer evenings. The sale netted me $35,000 after paying off the remaining mortgage and realtor fees. Even with all of that, I was still short of the money they needed. That's when I swallowed my pride and called my brother Richard in Phoenix. "I need to borrow $15,000, I told him, explaining the situation. Richard was skeptical. "Marie, are you sure about this? That's an awful lot of money to give away. What happens if you need it later?" "I won't need it," I insisted. "And it's not giving it away, it's investing in my daughter's future." Richard eventually agreed to loan me the money, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. The terms were generous, no interest payment plan over 5 years, but it still meant taking on debt in my early retirement years. By the time I'd assembled all the money Jessica and Brad needed, I had liquidated every asset I owned except for my car and furniture. My retirement savings gone. My childhood home sold. My emergency fund emptied. I was starting my retirement years with nothing but my monthly Social Security and pension, plus a $15,000 debt to my brother. But seeing Jessica and Brad's faces when they got the keys to that house made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. "Mom, I can't believe you did this for us," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face as we stood in the empty living room of their new home. "This is incredible. Tommy's going to grow up here, take his first steps on these floors, play in this backyard. This is your home too now," she continued, walking me through the rooms and pointing out all the possibilities. "That bedroom upstairs with the garden view? That's your room whenever you want to visit. This is our family home now." Brad was equally emotional. "Marie, I don't know how we'll ever repay you for this. You've given us something we never could have achieved on our own." "Jessica's right. This is your home too. You're always welcome here." I held on to those words like a sacred promise, believing I had made the right choice. I had traded my own financial security for my daughter's happiness and my grandson's future. It felt like the most meaningful thing I'd ever done. The house was beautiful. Built in the 1950s but recently renovated, with hardwood floors, updated kitchen, and a backyard perfect for children. The neighborhood was exactly what young families dreamed of: tree-lined streets, good schools, walking distance to parks and shops. For the first few months after they moved in, I visited frequently, helping them settle in and prepare for the baby. I painted the nursery a soft yellow, assembled furniture, and spent hours imagining all the family gatherings we'd have in that spacious living room. When Tommy was born 6 months later, I felt vindicated in every sacrifice I'd made. Here was my grandson, beautiful and healthy, coming home from the hospital to a safe, comfortable house that I had made possible. The financial stress I was beginning to feel seemed like a small price to pay for this moment. But what I didn't realize then was that the house had set a precedent. In Jessica and Brad's minds, I had established myself as the family's financial safety net, the person who stepped in when they needed something they couldn't afford themselves. What I thought was a one-time gift of love had actually become the down payment on 5 years of financial exploitation. Tommy's birth marked the beginning of what would become a suffocating pattern of financial dependence, though it started innocently enough. Jessica had complications during delivery and needed an extended recovery period. She was out of work for 12 weeks, and while her company provided some maternity leave pay, it wasn't enough to cover their full expenses. "We're struggling a bit with the bills," Brad mentioned during one of my visits when Tommy was about a month old. Jessica's leave pay is only 60% of her regular salary, and with all the baby expenses on top of everything else. He didn't ask for money directly, but the implication was clear. I could see the stress on both their faces, could see how the financial pressure was affecting their ability to enjoy those precious early weeks with their new baby. "How much would help?" I asked. "Well, we're short about $2,000 a month while Jessica's out of work," Brad said. "But we hate to ask." "Don't hate to ask," I told him. "I'm Tommy's grandmother. Of course I want to help." I wrote them a check for $6,000 to cover the 3-month gap, telling myself it was another one-time expense to help them through a difficult transition. But when Jessica went back to work, the requests didn't stop. Daycare for Tommy was $1,800 a month. Their health insurance premiums had gone up significantly with the addition of a family member. The house needed some repairs, a new water heater, some electrical work, refinishing the hardwood floors that had been damaged during the move. Each request was reasonable on its own. Each expense was legitimate. But together, they created a pattern where I became the solution to every financial challenge they faced. "Maybe I could just help you out regularly," I suggested during one of our phone calls, after they'd mentioned struggling to make ends meet despite both being back at work. "Would an extra $2,000 a month help you feel more secure?" The relief in Jessica's voice was immediate and overwhelming. "Mom, that would be incredible. Are you sure you can afford it?" I assured her I could, though the truth was more complicated. With my own limited income, Sending $2,000 a month meant I'd have to live very carefully, but it seemed manageable. For the first year, $2,000 was enough. But as Tommy grew, so did the expenses. Clothes, toys, books, activities. Jessica wanted to take Mommy and Me classes, which cost $150 a month. Brad thought Tommy should have a college savings account, so they asked if I could contribute to that too. The financial advisors say we should be putting away at least $500 a month for Tommy's college fund, Jessica explained. With tuition inflation, he'll need probably $200,000 saved by the time he's 18. So the monthly amount crept up to $2,500, then $3,000 as they found new ways to improve their lifestyle with my financial support. But the real jump came when Tommy turned 2, and Jessica decided she wanted to cut back to part-time work. "I'm missing so much of his childhood," she said during one of our conversations. "He's changing so fast, and I'm stuck in an office all day. Brad and I were talking, and we think it would be better for Tommy if I could work just 3 days a week instead of 5. Working part-time meant a significant reduction in Jessica's income, about $1,800 less per month. But it also meant more time with Tommy, which seemed like a worthy goal. If I increased my monthly help to $5,000, I said, would that make it possible for you to cut back your hours? The excitement in Jessica's voice was infectious. "Oh my God, Mom, yes. That would change everything for us. Tommy could have his mom around more, I could be more involved in his activities, and we wouldn't have to stress about money all the time." And so the monthly transfer became $5,000. $5,000 every month, like clockwork. It became such a routine that my bank eventually set it up as an automatic transfer, scheduled for the first of every month. At first, I felt good about the arrangement. Jessica sent me regular photos of Tommy, at the park, at story time at the library, playing in their backyard. She seemed happier and less stressed, and Brad appeared grateful for the stability my support provided. "You're incredible, Marie," he'd tell me during our phone calls. "I don't know many mothers-in-law who would be this generous. Jessica and Tommy are so lucky to have you." But as the months turned into years, something began to shift in our relationship. The gratitude became less frequent, the updates less detailed. What had started as an emergency measure to help them through a difficult period had become an expectation, a baseline assumption about how their finances worked. When I'd visit, which became less frequent as my own budget tightened, I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. New furniture that seemed expensive. A kitchen renovation that hadn't been mentioned in our conversations. Designer clothes for Jessica that seemed inconsistent with someone who was supposedly struggling financially. "Where did you get the money for the kitchen remodel?" I asked during one visit, admiring the new granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. "Oh, we got a great deal through Brad's cousin who works in construction," Jessica said quickly. "And we'd been saving up for it for a while." But something in her voice suggested there was more to the story. How were they saving money when they needed $5,000 a month from me just to make ends meet? I pushed the doubts away, telling myself I was being paranoid. They were young, they deserved nice things, and maybe they were managing their money better than I realized. Maybe the $5,000 I sent each month was giving them the breathing room to save for improvements and luxuries. But the doubts kept growing, especially as my own financial situation became more precarious. By the 4th year of sending monthly payments, I was barely scraping by. The $5,000 I sent to Jessica represented more than double my own monthly income. I was making up the difference by slowly draining what little savings I had left, living on credit cards when necessary, and making sacrifices that were affecting my health and quality of life. I stopped going to the dentist because I couldn't afford the copays. I delayed necessary home repairs until things literally broke. I wore the same winter coat for 5 years, even after it developed holes that let in the cold. Meanwhile, Based on Jessica's social media posts and our phone conversations, their lifestyles seemed to be improving steadily. Vacations I didn't remember them mentioning. Dinners at restaurants that cost more than I spent on food in a week. Activities and possessions that suggested a level of financial comfort that didn't match their supposed dependence on my monthly support. But every time I started to question the arrangement, something would happen to reinforce why they needed my help. Tommy would get sick and miss daycare, but they'd still have to pay the fees. Their car would need repairs. Their property taxes would go up. "We couldn't make it without you, Mom," Jessica would say during these conversations. "You're literally keeping us afloat." And I'd send the money, telling myself that their need was greater than my doubts, that a good mother doesn't keep score, that family takes care of family no matter what. What I didn't realize was that while I was sacrificing my own comfort and security to support their lifestyle, they were quietly building wealth and enjoying luxuries that I was directly funding. The $5,000 monthly payments that represented enormous sacrifice on my part had become just another line item in their budget, as expected and unremarkable as their mortgage payment or grocery bill. The illusion would finally shatter 3 days before Christmas, in a conversation that would expose the true nature of what I thought was a loving family relationship. The holiday season had always been magical in our family. Even during the lean years when Jessica was growing up and Robert and I were struggling to make ends meet, we'd somehow managed to create beautiful Christmas memories, homemade cookies, carefully chosen gifts, the warm glow of family gathered around our little tree. Now, with Tommy at 7 years old, I'd been imagining our first really special Christmas together in the house I'd helped them buy. I'd been planning for weeks, putting aside money I couldn't really afford to spend on presents that would make this holiday unforgettable. For Tommy, I'd found the perfect gift. A remote control car that could do tricks and flips, something I'd seen him admire in a toy store during my last visit. It cost $89, which represented nearly a week's worth of my grocery budget, but the thought of his face lighting up on Christmas morning made the sacrifice worthwhile. For Jessica, I'd saved up for months to buy her a cashmere scarf from Macy's, soft, elegant, the kind of luxury item I could never afford for myself, but wanted my daughter to have. It was $135, a shocking amount for me to spend on any single item, but Jessica had mentioned several times how much she loved cashmere, and I wanted to give her something special. For Brad, I'd chosen a set of gourmet coffee beans from a specialty roaster in Vermont, along with a nice ceramic mug. He was always talking about different coffee blends, and I thought he'd appreciate something unique and thoughtfully chosen. I'd even made 3 dozen of my famous snickerdoodle cookies, Tommy's absolute favorite, spending an entire afternoon in my tiny kitchen, the apartment filled with the warm smell of cinnamon and butter. I packed them in a decorative tin I'd bought at the dollar store and wrapped with a bow. My suitcase was packed and ready to go, filled with carefully wrapped presents and the new outfit I'd bought specifically for Christmas dinner. It was a simple blue dress from JCPenney, marked down to $29, but it was the first new piece of clothing I'd bought for myself in over a year. That house in Cambridge had become the center of all my holiday dreams. I pictured myself in the kitchen with Jessica, helping her prepare Christmas dinner in the beautiful space I'd made possible. I imagined Tommy running down the stairs Christmas morning to find his presents under the tree. I could see Brad and me having coffee on Christmas afternoon, talking about Tommy's future and all the possibilities that lay ahead for our family. The guest bedroom Jessica had promised would always be mine, the one with the garden view and the comfortable queen bed, was where I planned to stay for 4 days, from December 23rd through the 26th. We talked about it several times over the past few months, and Jessica had seemed enthusiastic about having a proper family Christmas. "It'll be so nice to have you here for the whole holiday," she'd said during one of our October phone calls. "Tommy's been asking when Grandma Marie is coming to visit, and I told him you'd be here for Christmas. He's so excited to show you his new school projects and the fort he built in the backyard." I'd booked my bus ticket 3 weeks in advance, $47 each way, which was cheaper than flying but would mean a 6-hour journey each direction. At my age, it wasn't comfortable, but it was what I could afford, and the thought of spending Christmas with my family made the discomfort seem insignificant. 3 days before my planned departure, I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror, trying on the new dress one more time to make sure it still looked good, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jessica's name, and I answered cheerfully, expecting maybe a last-minute question about what time I'd arrive, or what I could bring to contribute to Christmas dinner. So? I said. Perfect timing. I was just making sure everything's packed and ready. But something in Jessica's voice immediately told me this wasn't the call I'd been expecting. Mom. Her tone was hesitant, careful, completely different from her usual warm greeting. I was wondering, did you already buy your bus ticket? The question hit me like cold water. Why would she ask about my ticket unless there was a problem? Yes, of course, I said, trying to keep my voice light despite the dread that was beginning to creep into my chest. I bought it weeks ago, like we discussed. I'll arrive Thursday evening around 6 p.m. There was a pause, not a comfortable, thinking pause, but an awkward, dreading pause. Mom, about Christmas? Jessica started, then trailed off. What about Christmas? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to hear the answer. Well, it's just things have gotten a little complicated. Brad's parents decided at the last minute they want to come, and... She was talking faster now, as if rushing through an explanation she didn't want to give. And you know how they are, they're getting older, and his mom has been having trouble sleeping, so she really needs her own quiet room. And his dad has that back problem, so he needs a firm mattress in a room where he won't be disturbed. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Jessica, what are you trying to say? I'm saying that with Brad's parents coming, we just don't have space for everyone. We've only got the 3 bedrooms, and if his mom takes one and his dad takes another and Brad, Tommy, and I are in the master bedroom. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I understood perfectly. There was no room for me. In the house I'd made possible with my life savings, in the home where I'd been promised I'd always be welcome, there was no room for me at Christmas. I could take the couch, I said quickly, desperately. I really don't mind. I just want to be with family for Christmas. Mom, you can't sleep on the couch for 4 days. That's not comfortable for someone your age. I don't care about comfort, I insisted. It's Christmas. I just want to be there with Tommy, to see him open his presents, to help with dinner. There was another pause, longer this time, and when Jessica spoke again, I could hear something in her voice that chilled me to the bone. Not regret, not sadness, but impatience. The thing is, Mom, Brad's parents are really set in their ways. They're not comfortable with extra people around during family time. They like things quiet and predictable. Extra people. That's what I was. An extra person in the family I cared about and invested in.
Maybe you could spend Christmas with Uncle Richard this year, Jessica continued, as if she was suggesting something pleasant rather than devastating. You always say you don't see him enough, and Phoenix is supposed to be beautiful in the winter. Uncle Richard lived 2,000 miles away. I hadn't seen him in 3 years, and he'd never invited me for Christmas. The suggestion was absurd, and we both knew it. Jessica, I said, my voice barely steady, are you uninviting me from Christmas? I'm not uninviting you, Mom. I'm just explaining why this year isn't going to work out. We'll do something special another time, I promise. But I could hear it in her voice, the relief that she'd gotten through the conversation, the eagerness to hang up and move on with her holiday preparations. This wasn't a difficult decision for her. It was a minor logistical issue that she'd solved by eliminating the least important person from the equation. Let me talk to Brad, I said. Mom, Brad's not here right now. He's at work. Then have him call me when he gets home. I don't think that's necessary. We've already discussed it, and we're in agreement about what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone? Everyone except me. After we hung up, I sat on my couch staring at my packed suitcase, at the carefully wrapped presents, at the tin of cookies I'd made with such love and anticipation. The Christmas dress hanging on my bedroom door suddenly looked ridiculous, an old woman's foolish attempt to dress up for a celebration she wasn't invited to. But even through the shock and hurt, I kept telling myself there had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding. Surely Jessica didn't mean to exclude me completely. Surely she'd call back with a solution, an alternative, some way to make Christmas work for all of us. I waited for that call, but it never came. Instead, what came was a text message from Brad later that evening. Sorry about the Christmas situation. Hope you understand. We'll make it up to you. 17 words. That's how much my Christmas disappointment was worth to him. 17 words to dismiss the holiday I'd been planning and anticipating for months. But that text message also contained something else. Something that would spark the investigation that would eventually expose the lies they'd been telling me for years. Because as I sat there in my empty apartment, surrounded by Christmas decorations and wrapped presents for a celebration I'd been excluded from, I started thinking about Brad's parents and their sudden need for separate bedrooms and quiet family time. And I started remembering things that didn't quite add up.
Sleep was impossible that night.
I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying every word of Jessica's call, trying to make sense of what felt like a betrayal so profound I couldn't fully grasp it. Jessica's words kept echoing in my mind. Brad's parents are really set in their ways. They're not comfortable with extra people around during family time. Extra people. After 5 years of sending $5,000 every month, after giving them the down payment for their house, after sacrificing my own comfort and security to ensure their financial stability, I had become an extra person in their lives. But as the hurt began to settle into something harder and more analytical, I started thinking about Brad's parents and their supposed need for separate bedrooms and quiet accommodations. Harold and Maureen Patterson had been at Jessica and Brad's wedding 6 years ago. I remembered them clearly, a vigorous couple in their early 70s, active and social. Harold had danced at the reception until nearly midnight. Maureen had been the life of the party, telling stories and laughing loudly enough to be heard across the room. They lived in a retirement community in Florida, one of those active adult places with golf courses and swimming pools and packed social calendars. Every time Brad mentioned them in our conversations, it was to share stories about their busy lifestyle, bridge tournaments, travel club trips, volunteer work at the local hospital. Just 2 months ago, Brad had mentioned that his parents were planning a cruise to Alaska for their 50th wedding anniversary. They're incredible for their age, he'd said. Mom's taking watercolor classes, and Dad just learned to play pickleball. These didn't sound like people who were frail, set in their ways, or in need of special accommodations for health reasons. I got up and turned on my computer, something I rarely did late at night. Social media wasn't really my thing. I had a Facebook account that I checked maybe once a month, but I remembered that Maureen was fairly active online, always posting photos of their activities and travels. It took me a few minutes to remember how to navigate to her profile, but when I finally found it, what I saw made my blood run cold. Her most recent post was from 3 days ago, the same day Jessica had called to uninvite me from Christmas. The photo showed Harold and Maureen on a beach, tanned and smiling, wearing matching Hawaiian shirts. The caption read, "Day 4 of our Christmas cruise to the Caribbean. Weather is perfect, and we're loving every minute of retirement life." Christmas cruise to the Caribbean. I scrolled through more of Maureen's recent posts. Photos from the ship's formal dining room. Pictures of them snorkeling. A video of Harold attempting the limbo at what appeared to be a deck party, both of them laughing hysterically. These were not frail, elderly people who needed quiet rest and separate bedrooms. These were healthy, active seniors enjoying a luxury cruise over the holidays. The lie was so blatant, so easily disprovable, that I felt sick to my stomach. Jessica and Brad hadn't even bothered to construct a believable excuse. They'd simply assumed I was too naive, too trusting, or too desperate for their approval to verify their story. I took screenshots of Maureen's posts, my hands shaking as I saved the evidence to my computer. The timestamp on her most recent photo was from that very afternoon. Harold and Maureen were currently somewhere in the Caribbean, not preparing to visit Cambridge for a quiet family Christmas. But this discovery, devastating as it was, led to an even more disturbing realization. If they were willing to lie so boldly about something so easily verified, what else had they been lying about? I spent the rest of the night going through years of conversations, phone calls, and text messages, looking for other inconsistencies I might have missed. And what I found painted a picture that made me question everything I thought I knew about Jessica and Brad's financial situation. Last spring, when they'd asked for an extra $1,000 to cover unexpected car repairs, Jessica had posted photos on Instagram from an expensive spa weekend with her girlfriends just days later. The spa packages at that resort started at $500 per night. 2 months ago, when Brad had mentioned they were struggling with higher grocery costs, I'd seen posts on Jessica's social media from a steakhouse that charged $80 per person for dinner. In July, when they'd asked for help with emergency home repairs, Jessica had posted photos of a brand new designer handbag collection, including several purses that I knew cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. The pattern was everywhere once I started looking for it. Every financial hardship they described to me was contradicted by evidence of luxury spending that they documented on their own social media accounts. Either they were the most financially irresponsible people on earth, or they'd been systematically lying to me about their true financial situation. But the most damning evidence came when I started looking more carefully at the timing of their posts. Jessica would call me on Monday complaining about unexpected expenses and tight budgets. Then on Wednesday, she'd post photos from expensive restaurants or shopping trips that clearly showed they weren't struggling at all. In September, she'd called me crying about Tommy needing expensive school supplies and how they couldn't afford all the items on his school list. That same week, she posted photos of herself getting a $200 haircut and highlights at an upscale salon, followed by a shopping trip where she bought 3 new outfits that cost more than I spent on clothing in an entire year. In October, Brad had mentioned during one of our calls that they were really tight this month because of higher heating bills and some unexpected medical expenses. But Jessica's Instagram that week showed them at a wine tasting event that cost $150 per person, followed by dinner at a restaurant where the entrees started at $45. The evidence was overwhelming. Every single month when I sent them $5,000 to help with their supposed financial struggles, they were actually living quite comfortably and spending money on luxuries that I couldn't even dream of affording. But the discovery that made me physically ill came when I found a post Jessica had made in a private Facebook group for local moms. Someone had asked about managing finances with elderly parents, and Jessica had responded, "My mom sends us money every month because she wants to feel needed and important to our family. It's actually kind of sad how desperate she is to be involved in our lives. We don't really need the money. My husband makes good money, and I have my own income, but we take it because it makes her feel good about herself. Sometimes I think she'd rather send us money than actually spend time with us, which is fine by me because it's less complicated this way." Less complicated this way. I had to read that post 3 times before the full impact hit me. Jessica wasn't just lying to me about their financial situation. She was telling other people that I was a pathetic old woman who paid for their attention because I was too lonely and desperate to maintain normal family relationships. She was taking my sacrifices, my love, my generosity, and turning them into evidence of my own weakness and neediness. At 3 a.m., exhausted but unable to stop digging, I made a decision that would have shocked the Marie of 6 months earlier. I was going to find out the truth about how Jessica and Brad were really living, and I was going to get proof of every lie they'd told me. I was going to hire a private investigator. But first, I was going to do something even more dramatic. I was going to stop sending the monthly payments and see exactly how desperate they really were for my financial support. If they truly needed my $5,000 every month to survive, they'd call me immediately when the money didn't arrive. We'd have an honest conversation about their real financial situation, and maybe we could work out a more reasonable arrangement. But if they didn't call, if they managed just fine without my money, then I'd have my answer about how much they really needed my support and how much I really meant to them beyond being a source of income. I logged into my online banking and canceled the automatic transfer that had been sending them $5,000 every month for 5 years. Then I waited to see what would happen when the money stopped flowing. The wait was excruciating. Christmas came and went in painful solitude. I sat in my tiny apartment eating a frozen dinner while looking at the wrapped presents I'd bought for a celebration I wasn't invited to. The silence was deafening. No phone calls wishing me Merry Christmas, no texts from Tommy, nothing. I spent Christmas Day looking through old photo albums, remembering better times when Jessica was young, and we actually felt like family. There were pictures of her opening presents under our modest tree, helping me bake cookies, curled up next to me reading bedtime stories. When had we lost that closeness? When had I become nothing more than a monthly payment to her? The presents I'd bought sat accusingly in my living room for 3 days before I finally donated them to a local charity. The remote control car that I'd imagined Tommy's face lighting up over went to Toys for Tots. The cashmere scarf went to a women's shelter. The gourmet coffee beans went to my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who at least appreciated the gesture. But the tin of snickerdoodle cookies, Tommy's favorites that I'd made with such love, I couldn't bring myself to give away. I ate them slowly over the next week, each cookie a bitter reminder of the grandmother I'd thought I was versus the ATM I'd apparently become. January 1st arrived with no fanfare. For the first time in 5 years, there would be no $5,000 transfer from my account to Jessica's. I checked my bank balance obsessively that day, almost expecting the transfer to happen automatically despite my cancellation. But the money stayed in my account. January 2nd. Still nothing. No phone call, no text asking where the money was. January 3rd. Silence. January 4th. Not a word. By January 5th, I was starting to feel a cold certainty settling in my chest. If they truly needed my monthly support to survive, they would have called by now. The fact that they could go 5 days without even noticing the missing $5,000 told me everything I needed to know about their actual financial situation. But I was wrong about one thing. They did notice the missing money. They just waited until it became inconvenient for them before bothering to contact me. The call came on January 5th at 2:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I was staring at my phone when it rang, having spent the entire week waiting for this moment. Mom, Jessica's voice was tight with barely controlled anxiety. I was just checking our account, and I think there might have been some kind of bank error. Did your transfer go through this month? Not, how are you? Not, how was your Christmas? Not even Happy New Year. Just immediate concern about the money. There's no bank error, Jessica, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Oh, good, she said, and I could hear the relief flooding her voice. So, you'll send it today then? I was getting worried because it's usually there by the 1st and our mortgage payment is due next week.
No, Jessica.
I won't be sending it today, or tomorrow, or ever again. The silence on the other end was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. What do you mean? She finally stammered. I mean, I've decided to stop funding your lifestyle. Effective immediately. Mom, you can't be serious. Look, if this is about Christmas, I know you were disappointed, but we can work something out for next year. Maybe Brad's parents won't. This isn't about Christmas, I interrupted, though we both knew Christmas was part of it. This is about discovering that you've been lying to me for years. I could hear her breathing quicken, the first hint of real panic creeping into her voice. Lying about what? Let's start with Brad's parents. They're not in Cambridge recovering from health issues. They're on a cruise in the Caribbean. I've seen the photos on your mother-in-law's Facebook page. The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. Mom, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you felt the need to lie about something so easily verified? Can you explain why you chose to exclude me from Christmas rather than just telling me the truth about your plans? It wasn't. We didn't mean for it to sound. She was scrambling now, trying to construct an explanation that would make her behavior seem reasonable. But every word she spoke just dug her deeper into the hole she'd created. Jessica, I've been doing some research into your social media posts over the past few months. Every time you've called me asking for extra money because of financial emergencies, I can find evidence of you spending money on luxuries that same week. That's not. You don't understand how our finances work. Then explain it to me. Explain how you can afford $200 haircuts and $150 wine tastings while supposedly struggling to pay for Tommy's school supplies. Mom, you're taking things out of context. Just because we occasionally treat ourselves doesn't mean we don't need help with regular expenses. Occasionally treat yourselves? Jessica, I've documented over 40 instances in the past 6 months where your spending contradicted your claims of financial hardship. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Jessica offering increasingly desperate explanations for the inconsistencies I'd found. First, she tried to minimize the extent of their luxury spending. Then she attempted to justify it by claiming they deserved some enjoyment in their lives. Finally, she resorted to emotional manipulation. Mom, we've built our entire budget around your monthly help. Tommy's daycare, our mortgage, our monthly expenses, everything is calculated based on your support. You can't just stop without warning. Actually, Jessica, I can stop whenever I want. It's my money, but we depend on it. We've been counting on it for years. Then maybe you should have been more honest about why you needed it. That's when Jessica's tone changed completely. The pleading stopped, and something much harder and more calculating took its place. Look, Mom, I don't want to fight with you about this, but you need to understand something. Brad makes decent money, and I have my own income. We're not destitute. But we've built our lifestyle around the assumption that you want to help us. You've been sending money for 5 years without us even asking for it. You can't just change the rules now because you're upset about one holiday. There it was. The truth I'd been dreading, but somehow already knew. They weren't struggling. They never had been. They'd simply accepted my financial support and built a more expensive lifestyle around it, treating my sacrifices as guaranteed income they could depend on indefinitely. Jessica, I said, my voice trembling with controlled fury, do you have any idea what I've given up to send you that money every month? Mom, don't be dramatic. Dramatic? I eat expired meat and day-old bread to save money for your transfers. I haven't bought myself new clothes in 2 years. I keep my apartment so cold in winter that I can see my breath inside. I've been living in poverty to fund your comfortable lifestyle, and you call that dramatic? We never asked you to live like that. We never asked you to sacrifice. No, you just accepted it. For 5 years, you accepted $5,000 every month from a woman living on $2,400 total monthly income, and you never once asked if I could afford it. You never once wondered why I never bought myself anything nice or took vacations or lived like someone who supposedly had money to spare. That was your choice, Mom. We never forced you to send that money. My choice. You called me crying about financial emergencies. You told me you were struggling to make ends meet. You made me believe my grandson might suffer if I didn't help. We were struggling sometimes. Just because we could afford some nice things doesn't mean we weren't tight some months. The conversation was devolving rapidly, with Jessica becoming increasingly defensive and me becoming increasingly angry as the full scope of their deception became clear. But it was what Jessica said next that changed everything between us forever. If you want to cut us off, that's your choice. But don't expect us to pretend everything's normal between us after this. Actions have consequences, and if you're going to be vindictive about money, then maybe it's better if we just keep our distance for a while. Actions have consequences.
She was absolutely right about that.
She just had no idea what those consequences were going to be. You're right, Jessica, I said calmly. Actions do have consequences. You're about to learn exactly what I mean by that. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment for a long time, staring at the phone and processing what had just happened. My daughter had essentially admitted that they'd been using me as their personal bank for 5 years, funding luxuries while I lived in poverty. And when I finally stood up for myself, she'd threatened to cut me out of their lives entirely. The old Marie might have called back within the hour, apologizing and begging to restore the relationship. The old Marie might have been so afraid of losing her family that she'd have resumed the payments just to maintain contact with her grandson. But the old Marie was gone. In her place was a woman who'd finally seen the truth about how her generosity had been repaid with lies, manipulation, and contempt. I had told Jessica that actions have consequences. Now it was time to show her exactly what I meant. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Morrison Investigative Services. "Sarah," I said when the private investigator answered, "I'm ready to move forward with that investigation we discussed. And I want you to dig deep. I want to know everything about how they've been spending money, what they've been telling other people about me, and whether there's any evidence of deliberate fraud." "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Mason? Once we start this investigation, there's no going back." I thought about Jessica's threat to keep their distance if I didn't resume the payments. I thought about being called an extra person at Christmas. I thought about 5 years of sacrificing my own comfort and security for people who saw me as nothing more than a reliable source of income. "I'm absolutely sure," I said. "And Sarah? I want to know if what they've done might be illegal. Because if it is, I'm prepared to pursue every legal option available to me." The investigation that would expose the full scope of Jessica and Brad's deception was about to begin. And by the time it was finished, they would understand exactly what it meant when actions have consequences. 3 weeks after my confrontation with Jessica, Sarah Morrison called with the results of her investigation. What she discovered was so much worse than I'd imagined that I had to ask her to repeat several key points to make sure I'd heard correctly. "Mrs. Mason, I want to prepare you for what I'm about to share. The information I've gathered paints a very clear picture of deliberate financial deception on a scale that frankly surprised even me." Sarah had been thorough. Her investigation included surveillance, financial records analysis, social media monitoring, and what she called lifestyle documentation, detailed tracking of Jessica and Brad's spending patterns and daily activities. "Let's start with their actual financial situation," Sarah said. "Based on publicly available records and my observations, Jessica earns approximately $75,000 annually in her current marketing position. Brad's income as a senior financial analyst is approximately $98,000. Their combined household income is around $173,000 per year. $173,000. That was nearly 4 times what I lived on. But that's just their employment income," Sarah continued. "Jessica has been running a profitable side business doing freelance marketing consulting for small businesses. Based on her tax records, which I was able to access through public filings for her LLC, that business generated an additional $31,000 last year. So their actual combined income was over $200,000 annually. They were earning more in 1 year than I had received in total Social Security benefits over the past 8 years. Now, regarding their expenses and lifestyle," Sarah went on, "this is where the deception becomes most apparent. What Sarah had documented was a pattern of luxury spending that directly contradicted everything Jessica and Brad had told me about their financial struggles. Their monthly mortgage payment was $2,800. Which they could easily afford on their actual income, even without my contributions. But instead of using their own money for housing costs, they'd been paying the mortgage with a combination of my monthly transfers and their regular income, freeing up thousands of dollars each month for discretionary spending. In the past year alone, Sarah reported, I've documented the following major purchases: a kitchen renovation costing approximately $35,000, a new BMW for Brad, financed but with an $8,000 down payment, designer furniture for their living room totaling around $12,000, vacation expenses including trips to Napa Valley, Martha's Vineyard, and a long weekend in New York City, totaling approximately $15,000. Each item on Sarah's list felt like a physical blow. While I'd been eating expired meat and wearing clothes with holes, they'd been renovating kitchens and taking luxury vacations. But Mrs. Mason, the most disturbing discovery was what I found regarding their savings and investment accounts. Sarah's voice took on a tone that suggested she was about to deliver the worst news yet. Your daughter and son-in-law have been taking your monthly $5,000 payments and depositing them directly into a high-yield investment account. They haven't been using your money for living expenses at all. They've been investing it.
The room spun around me.
What do you mean, investing it? I mean that for the past 5 years, instead of using your money to pay bills as they claimed, they've been putting it into stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The account currently has a balance of approximately $347,000. $347,000. My money, plus investment gains, sitting in an account that I didn't even know existed. They've been using your financial support to build wealth while you've been living in poverty, Sarah continued. And based on their spending patterns, they could have afforded their entire lifestyle without any assistance from you. But Sarah wasn't finished. The investigation had uncovered additional details that made their deception even more calculated and cruel. I also found evidence of what they've been telling other people about your financial contributions, she said. Through social media monitoring and conversations I overheard during surveillance, I discovered that they've been portraying your support very differently to their friends and family. What do you mean? They've been telling people that you insist on sending them money because you're lonely and want to feel needed. Brad specifically told a coworker that you get upset if they don't accept your financial help and that they take the money to keep you happy, even though they don't really need it. The cruelty of this lie was breathtaking. They turned my generosity into a character flaw, my love into neediness, my sacrifice into manipulation. There's more, Sarah said gently. I recorded several conversations where they discussed you in unflattering terms. She played me audio recordings from surveillance outside a restaurant where Jessica and Brad had met friends for dinner. The quality wasn't perfect, but their voices were clear enough. Marie sends us $5,000 every month like clockwork. Brad's voice came through the recording. It's actually kind of sad how desperate she is to feel important to us. Don't feel bad about taking it, Jessica's voice added. She's got nothing else to spend money on anyway. At least this way she feels like she's contributing to Tommy's future. Besides, Brad continued, she offered. We never asked for it. If she wants to fund our lifestyle, who are we to say no? They were laughing as they said these things. Laughing about my sacrifices, my love, my desperate desire to be part of their lives. Sarah let the recording end before speaking again. Mrs. Mason, I want you to know that in 20 years of investigative work, I've rarely seen a case of financial elder abuse this calculated and sustained. What your daughter and son-in-law have done goes far beyond taking advantage of your generosity. They've systematically deceived you about their financial situation while using your money to build wealth for themselves. Financial elder abuse. Those words echoed in my mind as Sarah continued explaining the legal implications of what she'd discovered. You have grounds for both civil and criminal action if you choose to pursue it. The pattern of deception, the false claims of financial hardship, the deliberate misrepresentation of how your money was being used, all of this could constitute fraud. After Sarah finished her report and sent me copies of all her documentation, I sat in my apartment staring at the evidence of my daughter's betrayal. Photos of their luxury purchases, screenshots of their social media posts from expensive restaurants and vacation destinations, bank records showing the investment account where my money had been accumulating while I lived in poverty. But more than anger or hurt, what I felt was a cold, crystalline clarity about what needed to happen next. Jessica had been right about one thing: actions have consequences. She just hadn't realized that her actions were about to have consequences she never could have imagined. What I did next would have been unimaginable to the old Marie, the one who gave without question, who sacrificed without acknowledgement, who accepted crumbs of affection in exchange for a fortune. I sued them. My lawyer, Patricia Williams, specialized in elder law and family financial disputes. She was recommended by Sarah Morrison, who'd seen cases like mine before and knew exactly what kind of legal expertise I'd need. Marie, Patricia said after reviewing Sarah's investigation report during our first meeting, you have grounds for one of the strongest financial abuse cases I've seen in my career. The pattern of deception here is extensive and well documented. Patricia explained that what Jessica and Brad had done fell under several legal categories: financial elder abuse, fraud by false pretenses, and potentially even racketeering if we could prove they'd conspired to systematically deceive me over multiple years. The key factors that make your case so strong, she continued, are the duration of the deception, the substantial amounts involved, the clear evidence that they misrepresented their financial situation, and most importantly, the proof that they were using your money for purposes completely different from what they claimed. The lawsuit I filed sought several forms of relief: complete restitution of all money I'd provided under false pretenses, return of the funds they'd invested using my money, punitive damages for the emotional distress they'd caused, and full disclosure of all their financial accounts and assets. But Patricia warned me that filing suit would likely destroy any remaining relationship with Jessica and her family. Once we serve these papers, there's no going back, she said. This will become a matter of public record. They'll be forced to respond in court, and all their financial information will become part of the legal proceedings. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Tommy, my grandson, who would inevitably be affected by a legal battle between his parents and grandmother. I thought about the family gatherings that would never happen again, the relationships that would be permanently severed. But then I thought about 5 years of living in poverty while they built wealth with my money. I thought about being dismissed as an extra person at Christmas. I thought about their laughter as they mocked my desperate need to feel important to them. I'm prepared, I told Patricia. The legal papers were served to Jessica and Brad on a Tuesday morning in late January. According to my process server, Brad answered the door wearing expensive pajamas, standing in the foyer of the house I'd made possible. His face, the server told me, went completely white when he read the documents. The lawsuit was comprehensive. It detailed every transfer I'd made over 5 years, documented their true financial situation, and included excerpts from Sarah's investigation showing their actual lifestyle and spending patterns. The filing also included the audio recordings of their conversations mocking my financial support. Within hours of being served, my phone was ringing nonstop. Jessica called first, her voice hysterical. Mom, what the hell is this? You're suing us? Your own family? I didn't answer. Brad called next, alternating between anger and attempted negotiation. Marie, this is insane. We can work this out without lawyers. Just call me back. I didn't answer. Even Tommy called, confused and upset, clearly coached by his parents. Grandma Marie, why are you being mean to Mommy and Daddy? They said you're trying to take our house away. That call broke my heart, but I still didn't engage. This wasn't about Tommy, and I wouldn't let them use him as an emotional weapon. The legal process moved faster than I'd expected. Jessica and Brad hired their own attorney, an expensive one, based on the firm's reputation, which seemed ironic given their claimed financial struggles. During the discovery phase, Patricia's team demanded complete financial disclosure from Jessica and Brad. They were required to provide bank statements, investment account records, tax returns, credit card statements, and documentation of all major purchases over the past 5 years. What emerged during discovery was even more damning than Sarah's investigation had revealed. Not only had Jessica and Brad been living comfortably on their own income while banking my monthly contributions, but they'd also been taking tax deductions for supporting an elderly parent, claiming me as a dependent on their tax returns while actually receiving money from me. They'd been getting tax benefits for supporting me while I was supporting them. The investment account containing my money had grown to $389,000 by the time of the court proceedings. They'd been earning returns on my sacrifices while I struggled to pay for basic necessities. But perhaps most damaging was evidence that they'd been planning to eventually cut off contact with me once they felt financially secure enough to do without my support. Patricia's team found email communications between Jessica and Brad discussing what they called their exit strategy, their plan to gradually reduce contact with me while maintaining the monthly payments for as long as possible. Marie's getting more demanding about visits and family time, Jessica had written to Brad. Maybe we should start setting more boundaries so she doesn't expect to be included in everything. Brad's response: agreed. As long as the money keeps coming, we can manage her expectations. But we should probably start thinking about how to eventually phase her out without losing the financial support. Phase me out. Like I was a business arrangement they were planning to terminate. The evidence was so overwhelming that Jessica and Brad's attorney advised them to settle rather than go to trial. The settlement negotiations took place over several weeks, with Patricia pushing for maximum restitution and their lawyer trying to minimize the financial impact. During one particularly heated negotiation session, Brad's attorney tried to argue that I had given the money willingly and couldn't now claim it was obtained fraudulently. Patricia's response was swift and devastating. Your clients systematically lied about their financial situation for 5 years in order to obtain money from an elderly woman living in poverty. They invested her money while she ate expired food and couldn't afford medical care. They mocked her sacrifices behind her back while accepting her support. This isn't a case of family generosity. It's textbook financial elder abuse. The final settlement required Jessica and Brad to pay me $523,000, the full amount of principal and investment gains from my money, plus additional damages for emotional distress and legal fees. But the money wasn't the most satisfying part of the settlement. The most satisfying part was the clause requiring them to admit, in writing and as part of the public court record, that they had systematically deceived the plaintiff about their financial situation in order to obtain money under false pretenses. They had to publicly acknowledge that they'd lied to me and exploited my love for their own financial gain. Have you ever had your generosity taken for granted by family members who later turned against you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell for more inspiring stories of courage, justice, and finding your strength when the people you love most betray your trust. Your support means the world to us, and we love hearing from our amazing community of viewers who understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away.